Or they simply want to feel special about themselves. Like, yeah, man, I just take 1 gram of gear and 2 units of growth hormone, and that's it. When in reality, you might have to double that and add 4 other compounds that they're not willing to discuss or disclose. Welcome to Vigorous Mindset. I'm Coach Steve. Let's discuss 5 common bodybuilding mistakes that I certainly fell victim to in the past. I've made most of these mistakes myself, and some of you might be making these mistakes at this exact same moment. So let's discuss some of them so you can save yourself a lot of pain and hurt and limitation on your bodybuilding progression or overall fitness aspirations in the future. And we'll start with taking advice from IFBB pros. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be an IFBB pro. It can just be some guy that you follow that is, larger than you. This is usually the problem that we suffer from in bodybuilding. We only take advice or, inspiration from the guys that are bigger because we're trying to be big. And the guy that is bigger probably has more knowledge and has been in the game longer, where in reality, I've been training almost twice as long as Big Ramy, and he's Mr. Olympia. So again, there's a little bit of genetics involved, and most of the IFBB pros or the larger bodybuilders that are out there probably don't have the same genetics as you do. So when you're a general population bodybuilder with average genetics or slightly over average genetics, or maybe even below average genetics, bodybuilding is really a struggle for you. Maybe you should pick up chess. There's always other sports you can focus on. But hey, if you have a passion for bodybuilding, by all means, go for it. Just don't destroy your health in the process. So some of the pros out there with awesome genetics, the advice that they might put out there is not really applicable to your situation. So ideally, since there's so many guys on YouTube and, social media and with websites, etc., you go with a guy that you can identify with. Try to look for a guy that has comparable genetics to your own. So if you have average or slightly over average genetics, look for a guy that has, a lot of more experience and more time in the sport as you do. So you can actually have a little bit of transfer of knowledge because they're further down the road. So let's say you have average genetics. You find a guy with average genetics that's slightly more developed or was more developed in the past. I mean, when you look at me now, you would not say that I used to be a bodybuilder unless I throw up the front of a bicep and there's a hint of bodybuilding going on, even though I didn't train for 2 weeks, because I'm trying to focus on my cardiovascular endurance. At least I'm being 100% transparent with you guys, right? About my health situation and what's going on and what I'm doing. So even though there's a hint of muscle left, I still have the knowledge that I gained over the last 20 years. So there might be still something to learn for you while this muscle is slowly going away. Now, find a guy that has a similar diet strategy as you. Maybe you like carb cycling. Probably not a good idea to follow a guy that is a vegan or follows only ketogenic diets and has a one-dimensional approach to ketogenic dieting if you like carb cycling. Try to find a guy that has similar training intensity and training practices as your own. Find a guy that has knee pain just like you have knee pain. If the guy suffers from elbow pain, don't take his knee pain advice, right? You find something that you can identify with. There's plenty of guys out there on YouTube that are not IFBB pros, not incredibly large, and maybe don't want to be IFBB pros or incredibly large. Now, saying that you don't want to be an IFBB pro, it's not that easy. Let's be honest. It takes years of training to become an IFBB pro unless you're, genetically awesome. Unlike the rest of us, I'm happy for you. It's, there's a little bit of research involved before you find the guy that you can really take advice from, that you can incorporate for your own fitness or bodybuilding aspirations. And nowadays, we'll get that to in the second aspect of common bodybuilding mistakes. Since there's so many guys out there, the consumer ends up choosing. Right? But you still need to do your due diligence before you actually incorporate some of the advice. And it doesn't mean you have to follow advice from one person and one person alone when you find that, an identifiable guy to your own situation. You can take advice from many different guys, but you have to keep in mind that some of that advice might be, overlapping or might be the exact opposite. So, for me, I would talk about Primabol and Masteron, etc., because I don't suffer from hair loss. I have no DHT-related side effects besides acne, which I'm keeping under control. But if you're suffering from hair loss, that might not be the correct advice for you, because, of course, if you're prone to androgenetic alopecia, you have to keep the DHT derivatives, somewhere in the drawer and not in your injection depot, because that will contribute to your hair loss. So maybe you can take advice from me for, safer bodybuilding practices. And then you go to Derek from More Plates, More Dates for the hair loss advice. And then you try to incorporate some of his health practices as well. Right? So it doesn't mean you have to follow advice from one guy. You can mix and match and compare. But you still have to do additional research to see which of the advice that's out there is actually applicable and useful for you as an individual. Because I'm not you and you're not me. And I'm obviously not an IFBB pro or a guy that's incredibly large. And you probably aren't either. And if you're an IFBB pro that's incredibly large, feel free to out yourself in the comment section. And hopefully you didn't get triggered from this video. If you did, I'm sorry. Don't hit the dislike button just quite yet. There's 4 other common bodybuilding mistakes that IFBB pros also make. The second one on this list being taking advice from the forums. So you either consider taking advice from IFBB pros with, tremendously awesome genetics, and the advice might not apply to you. And the same issue comes with taking advice from the forums from the guys that are completely anonymous. You can't even see what they look like or if they even practice what they preach. Because on the forums, there's a lot of regurgitation of what other people's advice used to be in the past, which are people with more credibility or people that actually put themselves out there, for the viewer to behold if that, advice is even applicable, if they were even following their own advice. So take me, for example, I was diagnosed with a health condition, and since I practice what I preach, I follow the healthy approach. I decided to take that under control before I continue with my bodybuilding journey. That means that I'm a little bit smaller than before. Just remember that being big is usually temporary, and then being small afterwards might be temporary as well if you have the desire and the health to get big again. I've gone through this process once, even though I didn't really get unhealthy. The first time I took a year off from bodybuilding, I decided to travel the world, and I ended up 74 kilos skinny fat. And then I was 92 kilos 3 months later. So it's really not a big deal. But the guys in the forums, they would never post their pictures before, during, and after. They would just talk a big game. And then at one point they would get outed. You would see a picture and you would wonder, why was I following advice from this skinny little boy? Again, being skinny doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about. But at least there should be some pictures of where you looked like, what you practiced, what you preached, right? And for me, luckily, there's some pictures out there where I looked like I was knowing what I was doing. But for some guys, there's no pictures to behold. And they say they had a 5-plate bench press, but there's no pictures. And this is the problem we used to run into on the bodybuilding forum. So I completely came off the bodybuilding forums to get advice from there. And most of the knowledgeable people did as well. But the guys that don't know what they're talking about, they're probably still hidden somewhere on a forum or maybe moved to Reddit. And they're using a lion avatar or a booby avatar. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's horrible advice that I wish I never listened to, and neither should you. You can just go with a guy that's comparable to your own situation and then interact directly and see if they practice what they preach. Now, another common bodybuilding mistake, which I mentioned in a lot of videos already, but nobody seems to want to watch it. Watch this one. Really, you will save yourself a lot of pain and problems in the future. And that's the micronutrients. Really. The micronutrients deficiency that I almost see on a daily basis when I analyze blood work for consultations or clients, or, some of the guys that are a little bit honestly disrespectful and send me their entire blood work through Instagram, and they say, hey, listen, I have a service for this. Please be respectful of my time. And I will open the doors of all of my knowledge for you. Those guys, usually they just, send their blood work to somebody else until one of the coaches bites and gives them the advice that they want. And if they give them advice that they don't want, like, hey, bro, you need to do a therapeutic phlebotomy, get your vitamin B100 and iron intake under control, they'll say, I don't know, it's just, just ask somebody else, right? Those guys are out there too. Anyway, the micronutrient intake is still essential when you decide to bodybuild, whether that's drug-free or enhanced. Micronutrients intake determines how your body functions. And if you try to take the functioning of your body to the next level and try to gain all this additional muscle mass, whether that's with performance-enhancing drugs or not, you need to stay on top of your micronutrient intake because it's the zinc, the selenium, the carnitine, the phosphorus, the calcium, the sodium, the etc. that contributes to your bodybuilding aspirations highly and also prevents most or a lot of the side effects which are commonly associated with performance-enhancing drugs or libido or well-being or, whatever. Really, guys, it's really important, and I completely overlooked it for the first couple of years. And as soon as I started eating better, getting more foods in my diet that had high content of micronutrients or started supplementing specific micronutrients in, my bodybuilding doubled with the same amount of effort that I put in the gym and the same amount of effort that I put into cooking. I just cooked better and chose my food selection better. And that really progressed my bodybuilding. I got stronger. I got bigger. Workouts were easier, so I was able to add more weight, right? So it's always a progression upwards. And I see it so many times, the guys that don't really pay attention to their nutrition, especially their micronutrient intake, they reach a certain point, and then instead of taking that to the next level with better diet model and better supplementation, they sprinkle in the PEDs, and now they get a ton of side effects from these PEDs. So, sorry to say, but blood pressure, anxiety, night sweats, acne, there's many different methods to get that under control. And if you get that under control with micronutrients, it shouldn't worsen when you go on PEDs. And if you don't have it under control, PEDs will certainly worsen that when you decide to take them. So really, I know it's completely overlooked and everybody disregards it. I just need the macros and this is protein, carbs, and fats and fiber. What's that? Selenium? What's that? Zinc? Vitamin D3? Guys, really, omega-3s? Really, if you want to bodybuild, you need to pay attention to these things because it will hold you back. And then adding in the PEDs will hold you back also and probably gives you intolerable side effects. So again, watch that video and take your bodybuilding to the next level with over-the-counter supplements or a better diet model. Next one on the list, and this is one that I probably beat myself over the head with the most after the last few years that I became increasingly health conscious, and that is experimenting with non-FDA approved performance-enhancing drugs. When there's so many FDA-approved performance-enhancing drugs that we can choose from, and that are actually used in clinical settings to treat people from certain diseases and that have been investigated. There are pages upon pages of medical literature out there that you can read and learn from and put certain practices into place, whether that's cycling, hygiene, or supplementation, or a diet model that contributes to your health. When you decide to take those PEDs, there's a lot of things you can put into place preventatively to prevent side effects, to keep your blood pressure under control, your liver healthy, your kidneys healthy, etc. Because the data is there. And there's plenty of guys out there that tell you to use certain compounds alongside the performance-enhancing drugs. When you go on Trenbolone or anything else that raises blood pressure, maybe you should use a blood pressure medication. When you use clenbuterol that stimulates heart rate, consider taking taurine and ubiquinol to keep your heart rate and contractile capacity going. Really, guys, there's a lot of compounds out there that sound exciting, right? The mint, the trestolone, the check drops, the mebalorone. The SARMs. Really, the data is not there. The data is not there. And most of the SARMs are still not FDA approved. And yes, I've experimented with it. But after 3 weeks of taking Ostrine, noticing that I was getting weaker on my maximum lifts, understanding that there's some competition going on between the testosterone and the Ostrine, I dumped it all in the trash. Really. And I wish I never took it because it doesn't freaking work. And I wish I never took the DNP because I think I permanently raised my serum creatinine concentrations with 0.1, maybe even 0.2 milligrams per liter on top of the creatinine that I already produced. And I see a clear line in my blood work before DNP and after DNP. Really. I wish I never took Trenbolone because I was a moody son of a during that time. And I don't think that was healthy for my relationship, even though my relationship is absolutely awesome right now. So, when my wife told me, I said, hey, maybe it's time to get off the tren. I wish she asked me sooner, but honestly, I wish I never took it. And even though I recommend Trenbolone to many of my clients, at least those guys are doing a contest. Or they're very advanced and they might actually need it during their off season. But I rarely put guys on Trenbolone. The guys that want to get shredded, there's plenty of good compounds out there, like Test, like Primo. Maybe there's something to say for Mastron because it was at one point FDA approved and it was used in medical settings to cure women from breast cancer or prevent it from progressing. So at least the literature and the data is there, even though it's not really, conducive for hair loss. But again, the guys that compete or trying to get shredded, there's always an alternative. And there's plenty of alternative FDA approved PEDs out there that are reasonably safe and don't need to be taken at extremely high dosages like some of these forum guys tell you to take. Really, guys, there's no excuse anymore. At least when I was experimenting with most of these compounds, the information was not there. But it's out there. It's out there on YouTube. It's out there on Facebook. It's out there on Instagram. It's out there on Google. You just need to do a simple Google search and you find a ton of guys that promote safer performance-enhancing drugs use. And you can decide who you want to follow. Do they look the part? Do they look the same age or younger? Do they ever got into a negative health ramification and resolved it or just let it go uncontrolled to the point they had to completely abort their bodybuilding and, go on whatever protocol they needed to do to get their health in check? And yeah, there's guys out there that didn't get their health in check and passed away. So back then, when I was doing my research, we would get the advice from the forums. A Google search would not give you the information that you desired, and you made poor choices. But nowadays, you don't really have to experiment anymore because there's so many guys out there that promote safer performance-enhancing drug use practices. They've already done the experimentation for you, and they're open and willing to share what worked and what didn't. So why would you need to go through the same process and get perhaps, comparable results when it comes to the decline of health? That's why I'm telling you, DNP, no. Really, it's not a compound you want to take. Trenbolone, situational. Ideally, I do a contest prep without Trenbolone. There's so many compounds out there that just give negative health effects. Now, there's other compounds out there, of course, that are not FDA approved. And even though there might be a little bit of data out there that suggests that they're unhealthy, but the data has never been replicated, like GW1516, for example, which the entire fitness industry has already debunked that study that showed that GW1516 was able to promote cancer formation in rats, which were genetically modified, or mice. Mice or rats, I can't remember. It's been a while since I read that study. Either way, they were genetically modified to be predispositioned for colon cancer. Yeah, and GW1516 was shown to accelerate the rate of cancer progression. But growth hormone does the same thing. Carbohydrate intake does the same thing. Limiting antioxidants does the same thing. It doesn't mean that GW1516 growth hormone, poor antioxidant intake is actually to promote cancer formation, but it might accelerate it. So the entire fitness industry has debunked that study, and it has no longer been replicated, and there's no anecdotal evidence that anybody ever in the fitness industry was able to get cancer from GW1516. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using it, right? Because for the guys that do their research, do their due diligence, and really care about each performance-enhancing drug and understand potential overlap between different kinds of performance-enhancing drugs, and they all, contribute to a certain extent, right? Whether that's the anabolism, the hyperplasia, the hair loss, whatever other side effects which are commonly associated with PEDs, they all overlap, whether it's the positive or the negative effects. And you really don't need to do this experimentation with compounds that might seem exciting, might seem sexy, might give you this myostatin inhibiting effect that you're looking for. But really, it's no longer required. You don't have to go through this process because the information is out there, and a day of research should tell you everything you need to know, considering you're listening to a guy that has a comparable situation as your own. And then last on this list, on the list of bodybuilding mistakes I wish I never made, is using certain performance-enhancing drugs too early. Now, I was a little bit late to the enhanced bodybuilding party because I was drug-free for 11 years. Even though I was not fully bodybuilding for the first couple of years when I started going to the gym, as my gym experience progressed, I progressed into bodybuilding. But let's say I have 10 to 11 years of fitness and bodybuilding experience without performance-enhancing drugs, and then another 10 years experience with performance-enhancing drugs. But as soon as I opened the floodgates of PEDs, I felt that everything was fair play. So my first cycle was pretty conservative, 250 test, a little bit of Winstrol at the end, some clenbuterol, overdoing the Arimidex because we didn't have the information, and, forms was all that we had. Even then, it was pretty conservative, let's be honest. And then the second cycle, after I came back from traveling, was test and Trenbolone. Yeah, I'm ashamed. I know, I'm ashamed, but I'm not the only one who did it this way. I get many messages on a daily basis, bro, I'm on tren and it's my first cycle. And it's the same with other compounds. You have to slowly grind your way up and go through the bioidentical compounds first. That's what I wish I knew when I started performance-enhancing drugs 10 years ago. Let's try the bioidentical compounds first, see which ones you respond well to, and then we can go with the synthetic ones. And when we go synthetic, the designed performance-enhancing drugs, let's stick with the ones that are FDA approved before we go into the non-FDA approved PEDs, or used to be approved PEDs. So look at it this way. Enhanced bodybuilding is like a card game, and you have to keep your good cards for the moment when you need to play them and get an edge. Now, in the beginning, you don't really need an edge. You just need a little bit more muscle, and you can get a little bit more muscle from very basic compounds like test or primobolan or turinabol or growth hormone. I feel that it's warranted over a certain age, but it's certainly not the first compound selection, for most of the guys out there. They would rather run the Trenbolone sandwich just like I did. Again, it's a mistake that we all make, but it's probably better and more sustainable just to slowly progress upwards through the bioidentical hormones. First, get your TRT or cruise optimized, and then experiment with a couple compounds which are still FDA approved and used in clinical settings. And then some compounds you just stay away from, because guys like me, with 20 years of experience and plenty of mistakes under their belts, will tell you over and over again that they're not worth it, or they're only worth it in certain situations. So please do your due diligence in researching each compound. Don't take a compound, get a negative health complication, and then start researching. Yeah, I'm talking from experience. I know it's very irresponsible. It's like, oh, that sounds good. Yeah, let's give it a try. 50 milligrams a day. And then suddenly you start to get all these weird side effects, and then you start reading, and then you wish you read that before you started taking this performance-enhancing drug. This is bodybuilding, guys, and I think it really doesn't matter how much a guy like me or anybody else that puts all these safety practices out there. We all go through these mistakes. We get our hands dirty a little bit too early. We get side effects, maybe a negative health issue, and that's how we learn. We learn through mistakes. So again, I'm sure most of you guys can identify with these mistakes and wish you never made those mistakes. But it's a learning process for all of us. I completely understand it. I'm still learning. As long as I enjoy this bodybuilding journey, I'm still learning on a day-to-day basis. And whatever I learn, I give back in the form of these YouTube videos. And I really hope that helps, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're looking for safe performance-enhancing drug practices, I have a lot of ebooks about that subject. You can find them on my website, VigorousSteve.com/shop. If you're still having issues, you need some personalized advice, you can find the rates to my services there as well in the services section. Follow me on Instagram at VigorousSteve, even though I haven't really been up to date with my Instagram because my bodybuilding aspirations are taking a little bit of a back burner. don't worry, I'll get back to frequent posting pretty soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video. Vigorous crew, you guys are awesome. Thanks so much.